So with us now, the governor of Florida, Ron DeSantis. Governor, very good to see you. What do you think about this?
Well, it's interesting, Neil. I've been up here a number of days in New Hampshire since Iowa, and I'm the only one that's not running basically a basement campaign. I mean, I'm out there taking questions from the media. I'm doing town halls. I got 2 more today. I did one live on CNN, and I committed to do both debates. We were supposed to do one on ABC WMUR last night and then one on Sunday on CNN, but neither of the other candidates are willing to do it. It's just odd because this First in the Nation is really a tradition where the voters really kick the tires and they ask you questions. And having a debate here is a tradition. There's always a debate in New Hampshire. In fact, Ronald Reagan, 1980, I'm paying for that microphone, Mr. Green. That happened here. And so I think a lot of it is just media narrative, paid advertising, not as much candidates actually getting in there and answering questions. But I think that that's what you owe it. And so we're here. We're looking forward to have 2 great events tonight.
All right, you might be there now, but a lot of people say you're the one quitting on the state, Governor, that you're dialing things back. It could owe to your weak poll numbers there. I know you're going to be in South Carolina. That's an uphill fight as well. But what happened in New Hampshire?
Well, no, I don't think so, Neil. We were here the day after the primary or the caucus in Iowa, and people were actually reporting that I was skipping it when I'm literally here doing events just because I did a stopover in South Carolina. But look, I always knew New Hampshire is a momentum play after Iowa, and I faced a barrage of 50 million attacking me and leading into Iowa, and we were able to scrape a second, which under the circumstances I think was good. However, Donald Trump posted the victory, so I think he's benefiting from momentum here. So we haven't spent very much money here. Nikki Haley is spending an inordinate amount of money here. I just talked to a voter that said in one day they got 7 mailers from Nikki Haley in their mailbox. And I'm just thinking to myself, what? The first 6 you're not going to vote, but somehow that magic 7th mailer is going to do the trick. So I think a lot of trees are being killed for that campaign. But the reality is she's not going to be able to be competitive with Donald Trump on the ground here. That's clear from talking to voters. But I have taken more questions from voters in New Hampshire this week than the other 2 candidates combined, and I'm going to do more tonight.
All right. Of course, Donald Trump, leads her by less than he leads you. He leads you by a country mile. And you're quite right, Governor. Polls change and conditions change and who knows what can happen. But I do notice just from the ads and the campaign that Donald Trump is waging, his attacks are almost solely focused on Nikki Haley and not you. He doesn't even mention you. It's like you're invisible.
Well, I mean, I don't think he's mentioned anybody more than me over the last year. That's been constant. But I do think Haley has spent a massive amount of money here. She's trying to appeal to liberal voters who are allowed to vote in this primary. Right. You don't have to be a registered Republican. If you're unenrolled, you can do it. And so she has a big-time campaign doing that. Just like in Iowa, she focused on getting Democrats, liberal voters, to come caucus for her. So she's doing that. So I think that she's performed better in polls than she would if it was just a normal Republican primary. So I do think they're seeing that. But I think I think a lot of it's a factor of her dumping so much money into the state. I think an unprecedented amount of money for that. And so you obviously are going to see numbers with that. But I think her problem is Trump will run away with it in New Hampshire. I think that's pretty clear at this point. He's got the momentum from Iowa. And I don't think anyone thinks that she can beat Trump in her home state of South Carolina.
He's running away with it right now in South Carolina as well. This Tim Scott endorsement might grease the skids for that. So what are your options? Where do you go?
Well, here's the thing. I mean, I think what Iowa showed is he got half the vote, which is good, really good in a normal caucus season. But I think he's a de facto incumbent president that is the most famous person in politics. And so that was telling that you had half the people roughly that opted for someone else. Now, what I do think we saw in Iowa and what you're probably going to see on Tuesday in New Hampshire and beyond is there are a lot of voters that were resigned, that we were targeting that were interested in another choice, but they did kind of buy into the inevitability argument. And I think that's part of the reason why the turnout was so low, because I think that they just said, you know, well, why go out and do it if Trump is running away from it? So that is going to continue to be the inevitability thing. And so we've got to just let voters know, hey, you know, what does November 2024 look like? How is Donald Trump going to navigate all the things that he's going to have to navigate? You notice the Democrats are licking their chops. The Democrats want to see Trump as the nominee. That is not anything that I think is a secret, because they have a playbook that they're going to roll out. And as soon as they want to, they will. You're already starting to see these polls. There were so many polls saying Trump was going to be Biden in the fall. Now you're starting to see that shift. And my guess would be, if he sews up the nomination this spring, the media is going to be rolling out polls showing that Biden has a strong lead going into the general election. So I think with me, people don't have to worry about any of that stuff. It'll be focused on their issues. It'll be focused on holding the Democrats accountable. And I do think we have the advantage. When it's on issues, I think we have the advantage. If it's a referendum on Trump, I think the Democrats have an advantage.
But, Governor, what happened here? You've been a little more self-analytical lately. In a recent interview with you said, I should have just been blanketing. I should have gone on all the corporate shows. I should have gone on everything. You're referring to media appearances. We had an opportunity, I think, to come out the gate and do that and reach a much broader folk, and you didn't. In retrospect, you think had you done that, it would be a different race right now?
Well, look, I think everyone can go back and point to the Alvin Bragg indictment and what that did to the polling nationally, and that was unmistakable. And then every indictment that would come down. And so, yes, in my first campaign launch, but I would also point out 2 weeks after I started running, they had the documents indictment that happened, and that crowded out everything. So I think those factors have been really, really important. And then I think just
in other words, without that,
media
you think it would have been,
landscape.
I'm sorry, but you think it would have been more competitive, that ironically these court cases and the pile-on and everything else actually generated sympathy and support for Donald Trump that might not have been there otherwise?
Well, I mean, you can look. As soon as that happened, you saw the movement. And I would also say after the midterms, a lot of Republican voters were looking at it saying, okay, look, we like Trump, we like his policies, but this is a losing proposition because we lost all those races. Then they looked at Florida and said, well, wait a minute, you got Governor DeSantis down there. He is, you know, kicking butt, taking names. He's doing everything we've ever wanted as a Republican and then some, and he wins by 20 points and 1.5 million votes. That's what we need to do to be able to win. And I think just naturally, as we get further and further away from that midterm debacle, you know, people, that's not front of mind anymore for them. And I think in those first few months after that, that was really front of mind. And then I think the court cases kind of pivoted away from that more towards that. But here's the thing. I think it's unfair, and I've been outspoken on that. I mean, the Bragg case is a total farce. But the reality is how are independent voters going to perceive these trials and what happens going into the general election? And my fear is that it will have a negative impact on the ticket. And I think the Democrats know this, and I think that they're licking their chops to run this playbook.
You know, there have been a series of things. It's easy to pile on someone when they're having hard polling times, as you are, Governor. But the headlines are piercing. DeSantis in survival mode. Shaken by DeSantis and a wider margin for Nikki Haley. It's Nikki Haley's contest to lose versus you. DeSantis is running the worst campaign in human history. Dead man walking. I mean, you're a human being. You're seeing and hearing all of that. And then Marco Rubio, your state senator, who says, I'm supporting Donald Trump. I mean, that's got to hurt.
No, I mean, that's just part of the business. I can take the arrows. I don't care. I remember during COVID, they were saying all that about me and worse, because I actually was fighting against Fauci and fighting against the lockdowns. And they said that I was dead. They said that I was making a mistake. And the rest is history. Now, nobody looks back at that and criticizes me. They pretend like they were on my side. So some of this stuff is those folks have been writing that stuff for years and years. That's just the nature of it. I can tell you this, though. If you look at at Iowa, we did it right. I mean, we got the endorsement of the governor. We won the debates, the Miami debate, the Newsom debate, the News Nation debate, the CNN debate. We did televised town halls, got great response.
But
we went to all 99 counties.
You didn't win a single county, right? I mean, in 99 counties, you didn't win a single one. You visited them all, to your credit, but you didn't win a single one.
But I also had, how many people would have been able to handle $50 million in ads? How many people would have been able to handle all the headwinds we did? I mean, we had a very uphill battle. We dug in and we executed and we did run hard. We did do well. And what we got was traditionally what is considered good in a caucus. Nobody's gotten 50% before. This is something where you have a de facto incumbent president. So we're proud of the effort that we did there. I think we did it right. It was a challenge. I mean, we're facing challenging circumstances, but you got to play the hand you're dealt, and you got to do what you can do to be able to amass support.
I don't want to get ahead of things, Governor, but in looking at this, and you've been very, as I said, looking at yourself and the campaign and regrets and other things that you did, do you regret making the move this year? There are many who were saying you're a young man, you could wait it out, wait till 28. What do you think, in retrospect?
I didn't run to be somebody. I ran to do something. 2024 is a time for choosing for this country. If we have 4 more years of this, we're going to be in a tough time to dig out of it. I think it'll take perhaps a generation. I've always been skeptical about Donald Trump's ability to win a general election, and I remain that. And so I couldn't have just sat on the sidelines and not done it when I had the opportunity to make a difference. And we'll see how it ends up working out over the rest of the balance of the year. But leadership is about taking the reins. It doesn't matter if it's an uphill battle. It's not about trying to protect your own political hide. It's not about trying to position yourself down the road. If there's an opportunity to lead, you take it, and that's what we did. So that was the right thing to do. If I had been sitting on the sidelines and Republicans end up losing in 24, people then would have said, oh, well, you had an opportunity to do something and you didn't. So anyone can sit there and carp on the sidelines, get in the arena and fight for what you believe in.
If you were to run again down the road, sir, you'd still be a young man, of course, and a young family, but you'd be a former governor, and it's tough. Just ask Chris Christie. How do you feel about that?
Well, I mean, it's not a concern of mine at all. I mean, I think the reality is there's not anybody in elected office now that can put up a better resume of victories and achievements than I can in Florida. I mean, the reality is we've paid down 25% of our state's debt, cut taxes. We have the lowest per capita state government employees in America, small government. We've taken on ESG. We've taken on DEI. We've taken on illegal immigration, on and on down the line. Everything people have asked for, our voters have asked for Republicans to do, we not only led on it, we delivered on it. And that's just something that, and you notice, Neil, some of the criticisms that you lodged about, oh, the campaign and the process stuff, no one throughout this whole campaign really has laid a glove on my actual leadership. No one will say that, man, if a hurricane comes, DeSantis isn't going to do good job. Everyone concedes that. They're not going to say that, oh, he's not willing to take on the left. Everyone concedes that we've beat the left in Florida and the Democratic Party is now lying in ruins. Everyone concedes that we had huge victories. Everyone concedes that we managed COVID in a way that's put our state on a great trajectory. So none of them are about leadership or substance. And president is ultimately an office about leadership and who can deliver that and who can deliver the results. And so it's interesting, of all the criticism, usually they don't have anything to point to in terms of actual performance in office. And I just don't think that there's anyone that ran this year that could match the 100% promises delivered on. And that's what you should expect from your public officials.
All right. And they're all, trailing Donald Trump as we speak. What is your relationship with Donald Trump now? I mean, would you support him if it looks like he is the party nominee?
Well, I signed the pledge. I'm never somebody that takes his ball and goes home. And so that's just how I am. I mean, I don't take any of this stuff personally because it's not about me. It's about a larger effort, a larger movement. I do think that we've had some in the party that have made their entire political persona around just kissing Trump's ring, regardless of substance. And for me, a leader is only worth what they're delivering in substance. So I think it's important that all of us are held accountable for what we're doing. I don't want to see the party go veer far left on some of these issues. And I think you got to be willing to stand in there and fight on all these things. But the Democrats are a menace. We've shown in Florida how you're able to beat the Democrats. I wish we could start getting some victories like that nationally. Lord knows they're failing on the budget again. They're not getting done at the border what people want. And so there's a lot of cynicism and frustration out here when I'm talking to voters about the performance of Republicans in Washington.
You know, there is talk that if Donald Trump proceeds and does as well as he's doing, and it's very early, to your point, Governor, I get what you're saying, that he, in looking for a running mate, the first quality seems to be intensely loyal. What do you think of that and the list of candidates who would fill that niche?
Well, what I always tell people is, as a leader, my loyalty is to my family, the Constitution, and to the good Lord. And that's really how you have to be anchored. Politicians come and go. Politicians are useful to the extent that they're advancing things that you believe in. So when I fill positions, I don't look at it about, whether they're blowing smoke up my rear end or kissing my rump. What I look at is this a person that is going to be able to withstand the fire, show the backbone necessary to actually bring about the type of change that we need? Because when you're doing conservative things, particularly in Washington, you are not going to be loved by the people that inhabit Washington. You're not going to be loved by the media. So I look for those things, and I think if they're loyal to the cause and they're loyal to the issues that matter, it doesn't necessarily matter whether they've supported me in the past. They're going to do a good job. If they don't have that foundation and they're not willing to sit in the fire and fight for what's right, then it doesn't matter if they say nice things about you. They're ultimately not going to get the job done.
Governor DeSantis, very good catching up with you. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
Hey everyone, I'm Emily Campagno. Catch me and my co-hosts Harris Faulkner and Kaylee McEnany on Outnumbered every weekday at 12 p.m. Eastern, or set your DVR. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page for daily highlights.